welcome. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. A lot of you probably haven't met before, but just listen up for now. Here is the situation facing us. An alliance between an alien empire and their human collaborators known as the Black Reach Eternal Stratocracy, or BREZ, has launched an invasion of Australia. They've codenamed it Operation Dark Storm. The operation put into action BREZ's ideological goal of conquering Australia so as to repopulate it with the Empire. The Empire's general plan south aims to use some of the conquered people as slave labor for the BREZ war effort, while acquiring the agricultural resources of various oceanic territories. Their ultimate goal includes the eventual extermination, enslavement, and mass deportation of the human race, and to create more living space for the Empire. As defenders of this land, you will be tasked with participating in a theater of conflict between these alien forces, their domestic human collaborators, and co-belligerent East Timor against Australia, New Zealand, and other allies, which encompasses the Great Dividing Range, the Outback, the Pacific Ocean, and even Tasmania as of July 13th, 2020 AD, or 6 AI, to potentially 2023 AD, or 9 AI. It will be known as the Great Occupation War in Australia, and some of its allies, while everywhere else it will be called the Oceania War. The battles of the Oceania front of the Solar System War will constitute one of the largest military confrontations of the war. They will be characterized by unprecedented ferocity, wholesale destruction, mass deportation, and immense loss of life due to combat, starvation, exposure, disease, and massacres. Just like the invasion and the Iron Wars before, the Oceania War will prove decisive in determining the outcome in the Pacific theater of operations in the Solar System War. Mercenaries will also be a weapon of choice in the battles, with Ouroboros hiring many into their gang and a cabal of mercenary lords fighting against them. The battles will range from on the homelands we all know to those we can only imagine. There are many weapons at our disposal for this coming war. In the sky, there is a massive number of aircraft, from the vintage warbirds returning to service to the cutting-edge fighter aircraft of today, up to the scramjet hypersonic space planes of tomorrow. On the ground, there will be a vast variety of armored vehicles for your choosing, from improvised vehicles of the Outback resistance to powerful modern tanks, and the experimental weapon-armed test beds of the Woomera test range. Warships will also take to the massive seas and their tropical islands, completing the air, land, and sea battle formula, while in the depths of space, our new fleet of Starfighters will keep the invasion force at bay across an endless frontier. Choose the iconic weapons, or the unusual ones. They will all have a role to play. In the upcoming global conflict, everyone is important. Every action matters. The battle will continue for years. New factions, new territories, and new weapons will join you down the line. Find victory in our unity, duty, and destiny. Launch!
Evening, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Wedgetail. How nice of you to join us. Please, have a seat. We've got a lot to catch up on, especially recently.
So you're the Wedgetail they've been talking about. The 104 Squadron Leader. The Overlord of Gallipoli. And many other achievements I hear. You can call me Cantor, SASR, and ASIS, both at once.
Evening, boys. Nice to catch up. I've been a hell of a lot busy commanding everything now, but it is still Friday night in Queensland. Indeed, hell of a time for another alien invasion to kick off. So what have you been up to, Wedgetail? I hear you've been flying high again, more so than usual.
Yeah, I've been flying scramjets twice a week now.
I've been getting a good view of the war from above, and the situation right now is bleak. Bleak? Yeah, but not hopeless. I've been making sure that we are reinforced multiple times, and General Henkol's new weapons are certainly something that'll give us the edge. Oh yes, I've been hearing plenty of stories from the front lines and the resistance, many of whom are heroic. We all have, my friend, from this place to Townsville and all the way to the Prairie Hotel. Everyone's got a story to tell. The real problem facing us is all those collaborators, auxiliaries, as they're called. All these right-wingers, seeing the aliens as liberators and seeking power in this new republic they want to make.
We had a damn interesting incident when we had to break up a riot amongst the auxiliary EPWs. Seems like a bunch of bikies and rebellious youths didn't like being in the same tent enclosure as a bunch of unreformed terrorists and fellow travelers from God knows where. Simply put, they hated each other probably more than they hated us. I heard later in the permanent camps that their chain of command, as if they really had one, fell apart and they lived in damn near squalor. Even the other Stratocracy EPWs hated them. Had one Ouroboros officer beg me to tell them to stop forcing their way ahead of the line for lunch. He said he tried, but he was afraid his men, remnants of a VDV company, were going to tear those bastards limb from limb. So we segregated them into a new enclosure.
So, what did you guys experience in the opening attacks? You guys were working overtime. I'm genuinely surprised you guys pulled off what you did, even though we were all caught off guard. Someone mentioned the Battle of Tasmania? That was the only time Ouroboros tried an amphibious end run in the early stages. Really big mistake. You don't do amphibious landings with fishing boats, freighters, and commandeered ferries. The ones who survived had a beachhead for all of a day before they got ground to pieces. The terrorists didn't even bother securing the islands. They just tried bullying their way up into the Hobart City area and paid the price. Anything that flew or carried bombs or could strafe went that way as soon as the tankers went up. Scramjets from Alcara, one of which I was in. F-18s from Williamtown. Even a U.S. Air Force unit that was originally from Nevada, Dreamland, Area 51. They were getting Dreamland-made fighters into Woomera when the call came, and their old F-117s had one last hurrah. Hell of a way to lose an elite naval infantry brigade. That said, however, many hostiles still managed to jump off and hide in the mountains. Luckily, the Tassie wilderness gives them nothing to work with. The Royal Tasmania regiments responding by crafting armoured war trains to patrol the railways, diesel and steam. They're armed with guns on flat cars and rocket launchers. They range from stored Tasrail trains to preserved museum pieces. Oh man, that is awesome. I wonder if the App Train or Wee Georgie would be armed for something. That'd be a sight. Yeah, they came in from their occupied territory in Africa and their Antarctic base. They're losing ground in both of those territories fast, so this may have been a desperate measure. It showed. Yeah, my squadron didn't get a chance to take part in the Battle of Tasmania, because we were all working overtime on the other front, up north. Oh, hell's bells. I saw it happen from a wide scope in the command center. The assault of the Gulf of Carpentaria for the aliens was best described as a clusterfuck. The US Air Force's U-2s picked up the amphibious assault as it was jumping off from Indonesia, and from the moment they left hostile territory and airspace, my unit, among yours and others, pounded the ever-loving shit out of them. They fought back with an Ouroboros CV, whose MiG-23s got eaten alive by the Hornets flying out of Queensland. Yours truly got one of the alien LPHs with a pair of hypersonic cruise missiles. I doubt that thing was much help on the landing after that. Over the territories, the air war we delegated by whose plane it was. The aliens stupidly left the African mercenaries with their MiG-21s, which in addition to their rather poor flying meant they got eaten, and fast. One Korean F-35 got 8 of the bastards inside of 2 weeks. After the kind of losses they took, you'd figure Ouroboros would get them some fulcrums and instructors, but they kept being cannon fodder. A pilot in my unit shot down an Angolan MiG-21 with unguided rockets, for Pete's sake. And then Brez retreated down the highways. We called it the Queensland Turkey Shoot for a reason. To hell with smart bombs, we just went with basic iron bombs. Unless you missed the road, you blew something up. Several of my guys were trying turtling. That's when you get a Mach 84 in the middle of the road and flipped over a couple of enemy tanks. It was even better when those US B-52 buffs from Guam ran lengthwise down the runway. I'm pretty sure the Army engineers spent a few weeks just removing the wreckage after we were done with them. Indeed, but we shouldn't take all the credit for this one. A large amount of volunteers and warriors from abroad have also come to our aid. Many of them are fighting as we speak. Japan, New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore, Korea, and even Vanuatu with its 500-man strong volunteer force. Many of those from far away are being based here in Malkara. I got a feeling a new chapter of heroes is about to begin. The Thais were godsends too. When we were flying from forward bases, the Thais several times got the security jobs because their Stingray tanks and V-150 APCs were good tools for it. Australian tanks were to take their alien counterparts out, but a couple of times East Timor troops tried coming in on their APCs, which the Stingray cannons would blow to bits with their first hits, and the V-150s with Gustav teams riding in them would have about the same effect. They eventually wised up and sent the T-80s, which ran head-on into the Abrams tanks. That got hairy enough when we scrambled to back up the Abrams crews and tried to shoot down the Su-25s trying to back them up. An often result there was an Abrams blowing up the tank and a V-150 or M113 mowing down the survivors. Not many prisoners taken during those raids. I can't believe that nobody has mentioned the racetrack battle yet. Corinna, outside of Prairie, was being used as a reserve base of operations, which the Foreign Legion raided largely in Thai and private military vehicles, with warthogs flying tank buster with them. The enemy tried to counterattack with whatever they could scrounge, even trying to use civilian utes with Saga teams in the beds. The Legion guys probably never wanted to see another fucking Saga missile again, but thanks to the A-10s and our Taipan crews, they held. They took a few prisoners there, mostly guys who had the utes and lighter vehicles shot to bits who figured it was better to be without honor but alive. The BTR and alien tank crews usually got turned into sausage or human candles.
Yeah, we took care of business behind the scenes on that one. It was a multi-parter, but we got them all. The Ouroboros colonel gave up the names of the rats along with the rest of the details of what went on. For the record, it was the local cop, a couple of kids, school teachers, and a Unitarian minister who was working on the ration committee who turned them in. Brez liked to do everything in a communal fashion, even managing his rats. See, I've been part of the team run by ACES. Can't go into too much detail, but I have friends. Special Agent Dan Bosco, former Delta, and Colonel Andrew Teflon Mack. We've been hunting the alien insiders since the early 2000s, and now another moment of destiny has come. How crazy is that? The actual scumbags that killed the farm family were a mixed bag of auxiliaries, reinforced with some eco-terrorists and a few alien minders. The Stinkies were under the command of a couple of fascist college kids, a man and a woman who were getting it on in the off time. The man was an icehead from Mount Isa and was a real scumball, but the woman was a cold-hearted bitch from Rasmussen who enjoyed doing bad things to defenseless people. They had been both part of the plot, and we had been tracking them, but they slipped away to occupied territory before we could close in. Once those two vermin made it to occupied territory, they were recruited by the People's Commissariat for Defense and Class Struggle, which was the branch of the Gabra gang that ran the Stinkies. They were both assigned to the 473rd Volunteer Defense Battalion of the Haymarket Brigade, the man as a company understrength platoon commander, and the woman as his political commissar when they were commenced taking out their hatred on any victim they could find.
Oh god. Pauline Gabra. She's the head of the Brez puppet government, isn't she? She was already an annoying as hell politician that offered nothing but vitriol and hatred for anybody that wasn't Australian. I don't think my parents would have been able to make it to Australia if she were in charge then. And even if they did, they would be under intense discrimination and scrutiny. But her current deformation was made by injecting blood samples of King Ghidorah's blood when he visited Australia back in 2019. Must have thought it would give her magical powers. All it did was make people see her for what she truly was whenever she got angry.
A monster when she's angry. Kind of fitting, really. Although that wouldn't be the only sting she's had recently.
At this rate, we'll have to call members of the Resistance in the Iron Wars.
Oh, yes. One of the leaders of the Vigilantes is now a professor at James Cook University. My niece took one of his classes. Said that they were very lucky to keep the casualties down. First, it was a good day for a hunting trip, and everybody and his brother, literally, was ready to hunt, and well equipped enough to, as compared to the Barbar Foundation themselves. Second, they managed to bag early on and alive the captain, who was second in command, and who had comm gear capable of reaching all of the Spetsnaz troops. They convinced him that 1, they were not going to accomplish their objectives, and 2, they would all die painfully if they didn't surrender right the fuck now! And the captain convinced most of the troops to walk to the nearest house, road, etc. and wait for pickup. There were probably more Spetsnaz casualties, however, if you get killed back far enough in the woods, and you don't have a rack, and you're not meat, you're not worth bringing in. DNR wasn't enforcing too hard in that war. The professor joked about someone rigging up a holding area with a stereo playing Fortunate Son. Unfortunately, the humor was lost on the surviving Spetsnaz, as it was on my niece.
Here's a story from the early days. The local forces only had a single squadron of C-130s, and when Brez got close to out west, the RAF needed time to get the warhead convoys and the other refugees fleeing via the developmental roads out to safety. Several of these C-130s had delivered munitions for the army, who wasn't able to stop East Timor's push up the corridor. So guess what they did? Their C-130s were jerry-rigged as bombers, just by rolling cargo pallets of bombs and artillery shells out the rear cargo ramp. They called it an ad hoc B-52. One C-130 crew even flew out to Townsville to pick up a special cargo. It was from an army depot in America, a GBU-43B massive ordnance aircraft, a Moab. If I recall, it's one of the largest non-nuclear bombs in the US arsenal. The day before Brez went to Mount Isa, that C-130 dropped their bomb on the HQ of the East Timor's Expeditionary Corps and wiped it out. That fuel-air explosion was really powerful. The East Timorese accused us of using battlefield weapons of mass destruction. Several other times Moabs did get used, but those C-130s were vulnerable. Pretty much just drop the bomb and pray your hurty bird didn't get hit. But I do think we needed more time off after the Second Space War. We needed time to go back to our loved ones, especially our partners, and have some time off, if you know what I mean. How about you, Wedgetail? You found someone to have time off to?
Who's got time for that?
It's no good talking to me. But you should see what Horatio gets up to on Flinders Street once there's a night off. I don't know how he manages to do it. It's probably that silly accent of his. Yeah, the fraternization regs were the least obeyed ones military-wide in the past wars. Some of those off-road trips with Alice were intimate after a day of racing. A couple of times, though, the proceedings were rudely interrupted by small arms fire.
You guys are crazy.
After the 2-week-long hell at the Gulf, we were granted 1 day of camping for our efforts. My wingman had a combat security contractor squad leader as his girlfriend, and the first time that the small arms fire happened, she came out of the tent starkers and waving an M16. She went out into the bush and came back a few minutes later, dragging an East Timorese SF guy feet first, but still alive. The man couldn't believe that he'd been taken down by a girl wearing nothing but combat boots. He asked us to shoot him then and there. I reckon when my partner and I get married after the war, the ground crew will hang out a Just Married sign on the back of our plane. Boy, I bet that guy was embarrassed. Get caught like that? Bet that took his machismo and turned it into mud. Yeah, let the good times roll. Speaking of the Resistance, a story that made the rounds in Paluma involved a Resistance patrol down that road. Seems that they ambushed a Brez reconnaissance patrol and BRDMs, and they found an alien map of their AO, a codebook, and radio frequencies. That vehicle belonged to an FAC from the Brez Air Force, and they took the stuff back to their HQ. A linguist speaker who was studying the alien language used that material to call in Empire airstrikes on Brez and East Timor positions. And the poor guys on the receiving end couldn't figure out why their own planes were bombing them. It lasted until the code was changed at the beginning of the following month, but it must have been fun while it lasted. I reckon historians will reveal the very flexible doctrine and tactics in the air. The generals gave the F-14, F-15, F-16, and FA-18 high marks as air superiority fighters, letting the foreign legionnaires and volunteers use their attack assets like MiG-29s, Saab 37s, Hawks, Harriers, A-10s, XF-111s, F-4s, and even the Sabres and CF-105s if I remember. To their best advantage, the foreign volunteer squadrons will also be mentioned, and the Indonesian Air Force in exile should get its due, with command giving the Flanker, Golden Eagle, and Super Tucano high marks for their combat performance. And yeah, the many different planes flown by our brothers and sisters from around the world, Flankers, F-15Es, Hawks, the various F-16s, Golden Eagles, they all did well too. I have fond memories of one of the Royal Thai Air Force units that flew with us in Queensland, Grippens, which were diminutive compared to the Hornets we had, but those dudes flew them like they wanted to destroy them. They pioneered the idea of blasting right along the water surface to get behind the Ouroboros MiGs, then pop up behind them. They always did it better than us too. The Hornets and Ghost Rider drivers usually kept at least 75 feet below them in the water, but the Gripen drivers usually got close enough that spray from the ocean got on their canopies. The IUN has a squadron made up with Americans and Kiwis, another with United Koreans, and a third with Japanese. The West Coast has the PMCs and Israelis. The IUN flew out of Cairns, Townsville, and Mariba in the Pacific campaigns. Anyone fly with them? All of them flew F-16s, as the regular US Air Force needed as many V models as they could get. There were even some ex-Iranian Air Force guys who fled the mullahs in '79 along with the Ayatollah since, and settled in Malkara. They offered their services after the invasion and formed their own squadron. Several former Imperial Iranian Air Force F-14 guys even joined the Allies, and got back into F-14 cockpits with the Strike Force. They're doing great work. So basically, here's what will happen for the foreseeable future. All eyes will be on Queensland, not just because of the alien onslaught, but because of the atrocities committed by the human collaborators, and there are many, some of which have yet to be fully realized. And also an upcoming election, which is already proven quite toxic as is. But ACO has intercepted reports that some of the political candidates may have ties with Ouroboros. And if they fall into power, Ouroboros may have an advantage that we have never seen before. Yep, I better knock off too. It's gonna be a big night tomorrow night. Operation Dreamworld. I got a feeling that it's gonna be a real tide turner this time. So, the adventure continues.